this. New booth at some point. Alright, first things first, I'm gonna try out a different format. I'm gonna take a page from Chris Doe's The Future, and I'm gonna scrap the GIFs in whichever corner they may have been for now. I'm not putting out enough content that I want to put out because I'm dreading the long-form editing that is adding GIFs to all these videos. Now for the real stuff, let's talk about grit and how it applies to voiceover. First, what is grit? I'm gonna look down and read this verbatim. According to Angela Duckworth, grit is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. One way to think about it is to consider what grit is not. Grit isn't talent, grit isn't luck, grit isn't how intensely for the moment that you want something. Instead, grit's about having what some researchers call an ultimate concern, a goal that you care about so much that it organizes and gives meaning to almost everything you do. And grit is holding steadfast in that goal even when you fall down, even when you screw up, even when progress toward that goal is halting or slow. Talent and luck matter to success, but talent and luck are no guarantee of grit. And in the very long run, I think grit may matter at least as much, if not more. She's right. So why is grit important in voiceover? Well, first, because voiceover is hard. All aspects of voiceover are hard. First, acting alone in a box is hard, and doing it well is something that few people do really, really well. And if you assume that you do perform really well under these conditions, there are definitely other factors still working against you. Though barriers to what you think success is are starting to become less obstructive, but those barriers are still not entirely equitable. And going off script for a second, I'm saying that these barriers are less obstructive, but this is also being recorded right after that Funimation Crunchyroll closing off remote talent shenanigans that's been happening, which I don't think is gonna stick, but anyway, this was written before all of that, so bear that in mind, please. And I realize now, too, that I'm talking about equity and barriers, and this is coming from a dude that is literally just dripping with privileges and advantages, and I generally have less obstructive barriers overall, so I fully understand my point of view here. If you're not in a similar position, in essence having a leg up on competition in some way or another, which I know that I do, grit is going to get you where you want to go. Now, let's get back to why grit is important. It's important to have grit because acting is something that all of us can do to some degree or another, but very few of us do it really well. And I'm not even claiming that I myself am particularly good. I'm simply good enough to feel as though I ought to keep trying. And my willingness to keep trying is the grit that keeps me going and keeps me booking. So yeah, I'd consider myself good. I don't know if I'd consider myself great. There are great actors out there, though, that make merely being good the baseline, the bare minimum of qualification to have a real chance in the race that is voiceover. If you look around, it seems that everyone who's booking things is either good or great or at least plausibly better than you or me. So the thing that's going to separate you is your willingness to keep going when others may decide to give it all up. I have met and talked to great voice actors who decided to give up because things just got indefinitely slow, or they didn't get into the medium or the genre they believed would make them feel successful. Notice feel is the operative word here. So yeah, even great actors decide that this life isn't right for them because they don't have the grit necessary to weather the storm that is voiceover. Heck, I've almost quit during times when bookings got slow. And when I really reflected upon that idea, it wasn't because bookings were slow or that my acting was any worse than when I was booking. I simply wasn't stepping up to the plate. I wasn't submitting as many auditions as I should have per day, per week, per month. I wasn't having a lot of fun either, and that crept into the mic and thus perpetuated the non-booking cycle that was my VO life for a while. And then it clicked. You know, I was more interested in booking than I was acting, and then I just let go. Once I started to have fun again, I started to book again. I started to trust the process. I started to believe what I already knew about grit. I knew that I was good enough, which, as I said, was the minimum qualification, and then I just kept going, and I kept booking. And I owe it all to grit. Look, I owe it all to the routine of submitting to rosters. I owe it to the willingness to send those awkward cold emails. I owe it to continually checking pay-to-plays for auditions that suit me best. I owe it to networking even when those days are particularly hard. I see a handful of Twitter posts that occasionally say something like, submitted 5 auditions this week. This video isn't a sermon about working harder, and if that's all you can do in a week, then you should be proud of yourself. This goes back to those things that are working against you. You should be proud of the things that you can do, and you should always give those things that you can do the absolute most you can give. But I can guarantee that the actors you see making Twitter announcements on the regular about how much they're booking or are full-time actors are most likely submitting hundreds of auditions per week. And that is grit. It's not about how good they are. It's not about raw talent, although they often have those things. It's about the sheer will to submit an unfathomable amount of auditions in hopes that just one of them is gonna book, to deal with the rejection, or more accurately, the non-selection part of things. The dedication to habitually get in the booth and fire off 20 to 50 auditions in a day, every day. Their willingness to focus on the less artistically fulfilling work and take on some of those stale e-learning projects to make sure that their bills get paid.
Is that it? Just that one word?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes!
And some of these folks are doing this in spite of those barriers that I talked about earlier. Notably the tendency in Western voiceover to exclude others because of race or gender or disability or geographical differences and more. To clarify, these things that I just listed are not the barriers that I'm referring to. The barriers are the gates kept by those in the industry to keep people out who don't fit their ideas of tradition. These things that I mentioned are who you are and what make you beautiful and just make you you and unique and wonderful and make your voice something that the world should hear. I hope I didn't imply that these things are barriers, these are conditions. But the barriers are the people who slam the gates on people who possess these things that make them uniquely wonderful. So with that being said, I'll speak on one of these things that I feel comfortable talking about given my position in life so as not to accidentally speak on behalf of others who I have no business speaking on behalf of. One of America's greatest exports is entertainment, and that means that international actors want a piece of that pie. Unfortunately, geography is an insanely tough obstacle to overcome in this business, which is weird because a lot of us do remote stuff, but certain genres that we like to glom onto are rather exclusive in this regard.
Nani?
I know a handful of actors that are just stupid talented, that don't get the same fair shake that US-based actors get, and it's a shame, and it's something that needs to change to allow their incredible gifts to be showcased appropriately. But the ones that do find success, even though the proverbial torrential winds are pushing against them, they have grit. They are truly forces to be reckoned with, and they are talent powerhouses, and every win that they get is a win that has been undeniably earned through hard work and, you guessed it, grit. To remove myself even further from accidentally speaking for others too much or any more than I've already done, I figured it'd be best to bring in an international voice actor who has real insight into how hard these things can really be and how grit can take you to your destination. This person is one of the most talented, hardest working actors I have the privilege of knowing, and I hope that their story resonates with you.
So years ago, I coined tenacity as one of my favorite words because it's a little funny, but I found it really onomatopoeic in the way that it sounded like it had a little bite to it. But I knew it was the main characteristic I was going to need in order to carve even a tiny place for myself in this industry. Because I didn't know a single person who walked the path that I was trying to pave for myself. I started voice acting 10 years ago, but in truth, my journey isn't one of shortcuts. It didn't have a network, it didn't have agents. The idea of making friends as a pathway through felt inauthentic to me when I was caught behind a screen, and I was living pretty far away from where you hear about most voice actors residing. So living in Australia and being at a place where I could become a full-time voice talent back in the beginning of 2019 without any of these things was incredibly difficult. It was long and arduous and hard, but I also loved it because I can genuinely look back and say, hey, that was me. It meant I had to be great because there weren't any substitutes or aids to get me through if I wasn't. I had to apply tenacity to all elements of my business, and I had to learn to love everything that came with making this work from where I was based. I didn't have a choice. I had to love it. This was my roadmap. I had to demonstrate it in the thousands of cold emails and the thousands of follow-up messages because there were no rubbing shoulders. I was a name on a screen. I adopted the concept of sharing my work breeds more work to my social media output to increase visibility. I had to do consistent upskilling classes, which isn't so unusual, but I had to do it at crazy times. Fast turnarounds for jobs and accepting jobs at around-the-clock hours because I was predominantly working with clients outside of my country, very much outside of my time zone. Grit kept me strong doing all my not yet moments, in the form of the auditions I didn't book and the rosters that couldn't bring me on due to my location. It was also pivotal in helping me pursue versatility in my acting and sound, as I couldn't afford to be pigeonholed as the Australian voice actor, which is really sad to say, but I knew very early on that it was impossible for me to make this a sustainable business in the character world if that was all I was seen as. It's changed a little bit now, but unfortunately it's not quite where it needs to be, so I very much had to blend in with the opportunity to stand out in a positive way. So in short, I think for internationally remote voice talent, it's always so kind to be called talented or skilled, but I'll have to admit it hits a bit different when you're called hardworking or that someone admires your grit. Because I know we're supposed to make it look easy, but it's a really beautiful thing when someone can look beyond the credits and not call it luck, but they can see the work that you went through to earn it because they know that it came from you.
Although I'm not full-time myself, I haven't had to endure quite as much trouble as some of my peers. I've spent a lot of my own time and effort getting to a place where I finally feel like things are moving. After several years of grinding, booking small projects, booking big projects, coaching, getting better, upgrading gear when I could, and trying to remain visible to anyone and everyone who might be casting projects. Only now, after years, have projects started finding me. And that's without all the gatekeeping that lots of other actors have to deal with. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't gone through the hardships that are personal to me. I wouldn't be here if I took the lulls in my booking ratios as a sign that I ought to quit. And in comparison to those that do have to break down walls, I have it easy. You, respected viewer, may have it easy yourself, or you may have it hard. Regardless of how good you do or don't have it, you do have to make a choice. Is it worth it? Do you love it enough to keep going through the good and the bad? If not, make sure to send me a message when you do liquidate your gear because I am here to stay, and a lot of us are. If you do deem this painful journey worth it though, then let that grit carry you where you want to go.